They traded me to end a war. I was never a peace offering. Stay with me to see who I chose.
Chapter 1. The Hook. The dress they put me in weighed more than I did. Red silk, gold thread, a phoenix crawling up one sleeve like it was trying to escape the fabric the same way I was trying to escape my own skin. I stood in front of the mirror in the Yin family's east wing and watched a stranger blink back at me. Hair oiled flat, mouth painted the deep red of a wound, eyes carefully, deliberately empty. My mother used to say an Omega's face was the last thing he owned. Everything else, his name, his scent, his future, belonged to whoever the family decided should have it. I had believed her once. I'd stopped believing her the night they buried the boy I loved in a shallow grave outside Shatin and told the police it was a robbery gone wrong. "You look like a proper bride," Blushing said from the doorway, and I watched his reflection instead of turning around. My brother had dressed for the wedding in dark gray, sharp-shouldered, every inch the second son who had somehow become the one who mattered. There was something in his face that hadn't been there when we were children, a tightness around the eyes, like grief that had forgotten how to leave. "I look like a sacrifice," I said. "Don't say that where father can hear you. Would it change anything if he did?" Wishing didn't answer. He crossed the room and adjusted the collar at my throat with hands that were too careful, too slow, lingering half a second longer than a brother's hands should. I let him. I had learned a long time ago which battles were worth fighting and which ones you save your strength for. "I did this to protect you," he said quietly. "You understand that. If the Zhou and Yin houses go to war again, it won't be soldiers who die first. It'll be people like you, people with no guns. You didn't do this to protect me," I said. "You did this because father told you to, and because it was easier to trade me than to lose the shipping routes." Something flickered behind his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or the shame of being seen too clearly. "Both things can be true, Xiu." I didn't answer that. There wasn't a version of the truth that made the ache in my chest smaller. The wedding hall smelled of white lilies and gunpowder-sharp cologne, 200 years of blood dressed up in banquet tables and red lanterns. I walked the aisle on my father's arm like a piece of cargo being delivered on schedule. I did not look at the crowd, because I already knew what I would see there. Yin elders satisfied with a war ended cheaply, Zhou lieutenants sizing up the Omega who was about to be handed to their heir like a signed contract. Zhou Yance was waiting at the end of the aisle. I had expected cruelty. I had braced for it the way you brace for a blow you know is coming, muscles locked, breath held. What I got instead was a man standing very still, spine straight, hands folded in front of him like he was at a funeral rather than a wedding, and eyes that, when they finally met mine, held something I hadn't been prepared for. Not desire, not triumph, guilt. "Ren Xiu," he said, and his voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent his whole life making sure nothing slipped out that he hadn't approved first. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted. Does it matter what we wanted?" "No," he admitted, "but I wanted you to hear me say it anyway." It was such a small thing, an apology dressed up as courtesy, and yet it landed somewhere under my ribs that I hadn't guarded carefully enough, someplace still soft from 6 years of building walls everywhere else. I didn't have time to decide what to do with that feeling. The doors at the back of the hall slammed open hard enough to rattle the lanterns, and the temperature in the room dropped the way it does right before violence. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dressed in black instead of the ceremonial red the rest of the Zhou family wore, with a scar along his jaw and an expression that suggested he had walked 10 years and several thousand miles specifically to interrupt this exact moment. I heard the whispers ripple through the hall before I understood them. "Yinhai. That's Yinhai. He's not supposed to be here. He's not supposed to be alive." Beside me, Zhou Yance had gone rigid, every line of his composed body suddenly a held breath. The stranger's eyes swept the room once, cataloging threats the way a soldier does, and then stopped on me. Not on his brother, not on the assembled elders who had disowned him. On me. He inhaled once, deep and slow, like he was tasting the air, and something in his expression shifted. Hunger, recognition, the particular focus of a man who has just found the one thing in a crowded room worth wanting. "So," Yinhai said, into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. This is the bride. Chapter 2, Collision. Nobody moved. 200 guests. Armed men lining the walls in tuxedos that did a poor job hiding the weight of concealed weapons. And not one person in that hall dared to be the first to react to a dead man walking through the door. "You're not welcome here," Yance said. His voice hadn't risen, hadn't cracked, but I was standing close enough to feel the tension radiating off him like heat off asphalt. "Funny," Yunhai said, strolling forward like the aisle belonged to him, like the last decade of exile had been a minor inconvenience rather than a banishment. "I don't remember anyone asking whether I wanted to be welcome. I heard my little brother was finally getting married. Family should be there for that, shouldn't they? You are not family." That came from my father-in-law, old Joe, rising from his seat at the head table with the slow menace of a man used to being obeyed. "You lost that name 10 years ago." "I lost the name." Yunhai's gaze hadn't left me once, not through any of it, and I felt it like a physical weight, like being watched by something that had already decided I mattered. "I never lost the blood." He stopped an arm's length from me. Up close, he smelled like winter, cold air and gun oil, and something underneath that made the fine hairs on my arms rise, some alpha register my body understood before my mind caught up to it. I had been trained since childhood to control my scent in front of alphas, to keep myself locked down and unreadable. I did it now, breath, even expression carved from stone. It didn't stop him from smiling like he'd already read everything I was trying to hide. "Ren Xiu," he said, testing my name in his mouth like he was deciding whether he liked the taste of it. "The Yin family's little peace offering. They didn't tell me you'd be worth fighting a war over." Step back from him. Yance's hand closed around my wrist. Not rough, but absolute, a line drawn in the space between us and his brother. "Or what?" Yunhai's smile sharpened. "You'll do what you always do, Yance. Follow the rules. Keep your head down and do what father tells you, the way you always have. This is my wedding, my house, my wife." The word landed strange in the air, too formal, too final, and I felt something in my chest twist at being spoken of like an object being defended rather than a person standing right there with a voice of his own. "Husband," I corrected, quiet but clear enough that both of them heard it. "I'm not anyone's wife." For one suspended second, Yunhai actually looked delighted, like I'd handed him a gift. "There he is," he murmured, mostly to himself. "There's a person in there after all." I was starting to worry they'd marry my brother to a doll. The room had begun to shift, guards moving toward the doorway, Blushing's hand drifting toward his jacket, my father's face gone the particular shade of gray that meant fury barely leashed. Somewhere behind me, old Madame Zhou hadn't risen from her seat at all, watching the entire confrontation with the stillness of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome and was simply waiting to see which one played out. "Yunhai." Her voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk, quiet but absolute. "You have made your point. You are alive. You are angry. Everyone in this hall now knows both things. Leave before you make a mistake you can't walk back from." For a moment, I thought he might refuse her too. Then something in his shoulders eased, some tightly wound thing releasing just enough, and he stepped back from me with the unhurried grace of a predator who has decided the hunt isn't over, only paused. "I'll be around," he said, to me, not to the room, not to his brother. "Hong Kong isn't so big that we won't see each other again, Ren Xiu." He turned and walked back out the doors he'd come through, and the hall exhaled as one body the moment he was gone, conversation flooding back and nervous, two loud waves, elders already leaning toward each other to whisper about what it meant. Yance's hand was still around my wrist. I looked down at it, then up at him, and found him already watching me with an expression I couldn't name. Something between apology and fear, like he already knew this night had changed something he couldn't undo. He shouldn't have been able to get in. Yance said, low, meant only for me. I don't know how he knew the date. I don't know how he got past the gate guards. "Maybe someone let him in," I said. Something crossed his face, quick, controlled, gone before I could read it fully. "Maybe," he agreed, and released my wrist like it had cost him something to do it. Across the hall, I caught blushing watching us, his expression unreadable, his hand still resting near his jacket like the threat hadn't fully passed. And beside him, near the Yin family table, Lin Xiaodong sat in the pale blue dress she'd worn as a bridesmaid. The dress that should have been red, the dress that should have belonged to the bride the Yin elders had almost chosen instead of me. Watching the whole scene with an expression I recognized instantly, because I'd worn it myself once. Envy dressed up as composure. The peace this marriage was supposed to buy had lasted exactly 40 minutes. Chapter 3. Growing Tension. The Zhou estate was beautiful in the way that expensive things often are: cold, deliberate, built to impress rather than to comfort. My rooms overlooked a garden of black pine and white stone, and in the 3 weeks since the wedding I had learned every shadow it cast at every hour of the day, because sleep had become something that happened to other people. "You're not eating," Yan said one evening, watching me push rice around a bowl I had no intention of finishing. "I'm adjusting." "You've been adjusting for 3 weeks. Some of us adjust slower than others." I glanced up at him, expecting the flicker of irritation I'd grown used to seeing on my father's face whenever I failed to perform gratitude correctly. Instead, I found him watching me with something quieter, something that looked uncomfortably like concern. We had fallen into an odd rhythm, Yance and I. He was not warm. I don't think warmth was a language he'd ever been taught fluently, but he was careful with me in ways I hadn't expected. He knocked before entering rooms I was in. He asked before he touched me, even for small things, a hand on my elbow crossing a threshold. He had not, in 3 weeks of marriage, come to my bed, and I didn't know whether to be relieved or insulted by that. "Boshing came by again today," he said, setting down his chopsticks. "While I was in Kowloon, something in my stomach went tight. He didn't mention it. He wasn't here to see you. He asked to see the household ledgers. Said it was a courtesy visit, checking that the yin dowry terms were being honored." Yance's eyes stayed on my face, reading something there I hadn't meant to show. "He asks a great many questions for a courtesy visit. He worries about me. I think," Yance said carefully, "that your brother's worry has started to look like something else." I didn't answer that because I'd been thinking the same thing for longer than I wanted to admit. The way Boshing's visits had grown more frequent since the wedding, the way his hands lingered, the way he asked about my scent, my sleep, my husband, with a proprietary edge that hadn't been there when we were children. Before I could find a safe way to say any of it, the door opened without a knock, and Suman, the household doctor, stepped in with the particular urgency of someone who had been running. "Young master," she said to Yance, then turned to me, and I watched her expression do something complicated. "I need to examine you. Now, if you don't mind." "What?" I asked, though something in my body already knew, some instinct rising under my skin like heat before fever breaks. "Because half the household staff has been asking me about it for 2 days, and I didn't want to alarm you before I was certain." She set her bag down and looked at me with an apology already forming behind her eyes. "Your scent has changed." Yance went very still beside me. "Changed how?" I asked. "Sweeter," Suman said. "Sharper. It's not dramatic yet. Most alphas outside this house wouldn't notice, but anyone who spent real time near you would." Her eyes flicked briefly, deliberately toward Yance. "It usually means one of 2 things. Either your body is preparing for a heat cycle earlier than expected, or," I said, when she didn't continue, "or it's responding to proximity, to someone specific." She said it gently, like she already regretted having to. "Scent doesn't lie the way we do, Ren Xiu. It reacts to what the body wants, whether or not the mind has agreed to want it yet." I felt my face go hot and hated myself for it. "That's not. I haven't been near anyone who—" "You were near Zhou Yinhai for less than 5 minutes at your wedding," Suman said quietly. "Sometimes that's enough to start something. It doesn't mean you chose it. It means your body noticed him before you decided whether you wanted it to." The silence that followed felt like a held breath in the whole room. I didn't dare look at Yance. When I finally did, his jaw was tight, his eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder, and I understood, with a sinking, sick clarity, exactly what this meant for a man who had married me to end a war. If my scent had begun answering his exiled brother instead of him, the peace this marriage was supposed to buy had never really existed at all. "How long?" Yance said, very quietly, before others notice? Su-man didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything her words hadn't. Chapter 4. The Midpoint Twist. Chung-wei found me in the tea garden 3 days later, appearing between the black pines like he'd been carved from the same shadows. "You shouldn't be here alone," I said, though I made no move to call for the guard stationed at the garden's edge. Something about him, sharp-suited, unhurried, dangerous in the specific way of men who never needed to raise their voice to be obeyed, made me curious rather than afraid. "I have business with the Zhou house." I was told to wait in the garden. He studied me with open assessment, the kind that should have felt insulting and instead felt oddly honest, uncomplicated by the guilt or hunger I'd grown used to reading on every other face turned toward me. "You're the reason half the syndicate councils in this city haven't slept properly in a month." I didn't ask to be. "No," he agreed. "Most valuable things never ask. That's usually what makes them valuable." He tilted his head, considering. "Chung-wei, I represent interests outside the Yin-Zhou arrangement. I know who you are. Word traveled fast in a house full of people with nothing to do but watch me. You're the reason Yance doubled the gate guards last week." Smart man. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "I came to deliver a message to your husband. But since you're here, I wonder if you understand what you actually are, Ren Xiu, or if everyone's been too busy fighting over you to explain it. Enlighten me. You're the only thing in this city 3 separate power structures agree is worth risking a war for. That's not romance. That's leverage with a heartbeat." He said it without cruelty, almost like a kindness, like he thought I deserved to hear the truth, plainly for once. I'd be lying if I said my employer didn't send me here, hoping to find a way to use that. But I'll be honest with you about something else, too. His eyes flicked over me, frank and unhurried. "I didn't expect to find you interesting on top of it." I didn't get to answer. The door to the tea house banged open, and Blushing strode out with a fury I had rarely seen on him, crossing the distance between us fast enough that Chung-wei's hand drifted, briefly, toward his jacket before he registered who it was. "Get away from him," Blushing said. "Your sister's husband," Chung-wei said mildly, "invited me onto this property. I don't take orders from Yin men." "He's my brother," Blushing snapped, and something in the particular violence of that correction made both Chung-wei's eyebrows rise and my stomach drop. Chung-wei looked between us with new, sharpening interest, the way a man recalculates a hand of cards. "Interesting," he said softly, and left it there, bowing shallow and unhurried before walking back toward the main house, unbothered by Blushing's glare following him the entire way. The moment he was gone, Blushing rounded on me. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing you need to. Everything involving you is something I need to know." His hand closed around my arm, too tight, and I felt the familiar flare of frustration curdle into something colder, more frightened, when I looked at his face and didn't recognize the person looking back. "Blushing, you're hurting me." He released me immediately, horror flickering across his face like he'd only just realized what he'd done, and in that gap of silence, something he'd clearly been carrying for a long time finally broke loose. "I never should have let them choose you," he said, voice cracking. "I told father to send Xiaotong instead. I told him I would find another way to end the feud, any other way, and he wouldn't listen, and he stopped himself, jaw working, eyes went in a way I had not seen since we were children and our mother died. Do you know what I did, Xiu? Do you know what it cost me to get you even this much protection?" "What are you talking about?" 10 years ago," he said, and his voice dropped so low I had to lean in to catch it. "When Zhou Yunhai was exiled, it wasn't a Zhou family matter. Father orchestrated it. I helped him. We planted the evidence that got Yunhai disowned, because a divided Zhou house was easier to negotiate with than a united one." His hands were shaking. I was 22. I didn't understand what it would mean 10 years later that the man we destroyed would come back wanting revenge with you standing in the middle of it. The garden seemed to tilt slightly around me. "You did this," I said slowly. "You're the reason he's back. You're the reason he's looking at me like I'm something to reclaim." "I did it to protect the family," Blushing said, reaching for my hand again, and this time I stepped back before he could take it. "Everything I've done, Xiu, the marriage, the exile, all of it, It was to keep you safe. You have to understand that. I looked at my brother, really looked at him past the guilt and the desperation, and understood with a clarity that felt like ice water down my spine, that he believed every word of it, that in his mind, 10 years of manufactured ruin and one traded life were simply the cost of love, and that he expected me to thank him for it. You didn't protect me, I said quietly. You built the war you claimed to be ending, and now you expect me to stand in the middle of the fire you started. I turned and walked back toward the house without waiting for his answer, my pulse hammering, my mind already turning over the question that would define everything that came after. If Bushing had lied about this, what else had every person who claimed to love me been lying about? Chapter 5. Everything falls apart. I didn't tell Yance what Bushing had confessed. Not that night, not the next. I told myself I was protecting my brother, but the truth was uglier. I didn't yet know what to do with a truth that dangerous, and some small, exhausted part of me was still hoping I could hold the piece together with silence alone. I should have known better. Silence had never protected anyone in my family. It only ever bought time for the next disaster. The disaster arrived in the shape of Ren Xiu. 3 nights later, slipping into my rooms through the garden door with her face pale and her hands shaking. You need to leave the estate, she said, without greeting, without preamble. Tonight, before midnight. Xiaodong, don't. Her voice cracked down the middle. Years of careful composure finally giving way. Don't act surprised that I know things, Ren Xiu. I've spent my whole life being the girl who almost mattered. Almost the bride, almost enough, almost chosen. You think I haven't learned to listen at doors? I studied her, something cold pooling in my stomach. What did you hear? Your father made a deal with the rival syndicate. With Chung Wei's people. She twisted her hands together, and I realized, looking at her properly for the first time in weeks, how thin she'd gotten, how tightly wound. They're going to stage an attack on you tonight. Make it look like Zhou Yinhai did it. It'll destroy what's left of the ceasefire, put the blame on the disowned son, and let your father renegotiate the whole arrangement from a position of strength. That's insane. Why would he risk? Because you're worth more to him broken than whole, she said, and the bitterness in her voice was old, older than tonight, older than the wedding. That's what we are to them, Xiao. Leverage that bleeds. I know because I spent years hoping to be chosen for the exact same use. I should have believed her instantly. I wanted to, but some old, hard-won instinct, the same one that had kept me alive through a childhood of being traded and measured and found useful, made me hesitate. Why are you telling me this? Her face crumpled, just for a moment, into something raw. Because I hated you for a long time, she admitted, for being chosen when I wasn't. But I don't hate you enough to watch you die for a piece that was never real to begin with. I believed her then, the pain in her voice too specific, too costly to be performance. I grabbed my coat. We didn't make it past the garden gate. For men came out of the tree lane before I'd taken 10 steps, and I recognized the insignia on their sleeves even in the dark. Not Yin men, not Zhou men. Chung Wei's people, exactly as Xiaodong had warned, except the timing was wrong. The plan already moving faster than she'd known. Run, I told her, but she didn't. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the wall instead, and in the chaos of the next several seconds I understood, with the clean clarity terror sometimes brings, that we were not going to make out on our own. A gunshot cracked across the garden. Xiaodong screamed. I felt her weight drop against me, her hand slipping from my arm, red blooming fast and dark across her pale blue sleeve, and I went down on my knees beside her with my ears ringing and my hands shaking too hard to find the wound. Xiaodong, stay with me, stay with me. More gunfire, closer now, and shouting from the main house. And through the blur of panic and blood on my hands, I saw a figure move through the smoke toward us with terrible, focused speed. Dark clothes, a scar along his jaw, an expression that had gone past fury into something colder and more absolute. Yinhai reached me before Yance did. He put himself bodily between me and the tree-lean, gun already drawn, and for one strange, suspended second, I registered that the first person to reach me in the dark wasn't the husband who'd promised to protect me. It was the man everyone had told me to fear. Get him inside. Yunhai snarled at someone behind him, and then, quieter, meant only for me, his hand closing hard and sure around my shoulder. You're not dying in this garden. Not for their war. Not tonight. Behind him, I heard Yance's voice tearing through the chaos, raw in a way I had never heard it, calling my name like a man who had just understood, far too late, how close he'd come to losing something he'd never let himself admit he wanted. I looked down at Xiaodong's blood soaking into the ground, at the ruin of a plan that had cost her everything to warn me about, and felt the last of my careful, self-protective silence burn away. Someone in my own family had done this. Someone I was supposed to trust had traded a girl's life for a war he wanted to win. I was done being the ground everyone else fought their battles on. Chapter 6. Fighting Back. Xiaodong survived. The bullet had taken muscle, not artery, and Su Man worked over her for 2 hours in the estate's private clinic while I sat outside the door with someone else's blood dried stiff on my hands and refused every offer to leave. It was past 2 in the morning when Yance finally found me there, still sitting on the floor of the corridor because I hadn't had the strength to stand. He didn't say anything at first. He sat down beside me on the cold marble, folded his long frame down without any of his usual careful composure, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I should have told you what Bushing confessed, I said finally, about Yunhai's exile. I knew days ago, and I said nothing, and Xiaodong nearly died because everyone in my life has decided that keeping me safe means keeping me blind. I know about the exile, Yance said quietly. I've known for 3 years. I turned to look at him properly for the first time since he'd sat down. What? I found the falsified evidence when I took over the ledgers. I never told my grandmother because I didn't know what it would do to the house if it came out, whether it would destroy what little peace we had, or whether Yunhai deserved to know the truth more than the peace deserved protecting. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some point on the far wall. I've spent 3 years telling myself that silence was strategy. Tonight a girl was shot in my garden because everyone around you decided silence was safer than honesty. I don't think I get to call that strategy anymore. I think it was cowardice with better manners. It was the most I had ever heard him say about himself, unguarded, without the careful architecture he usually built around his own feelings. Why are you telling me now? Because I almost lost you tonight, he said, and his voice finally cracked, just slightly, just enough to let me hear what was underneath it. And I realized, standing in that garden watching my brother reach you before I did, that I've spent this entire marriage protecting everyone's interests except the truth of what I actually feel. I told myself I married you for the ceasefire. I told myself wanting you was inconvenient. So I simply didn't let myself want you out loud, where it could cost either of us anything. And now I think pretending costs more. He turned to face me fully, and there was nothing careful left in his expression, nothing composed. I don't know how to be the man my brother is. Reckless, certain, willing to burn down a garden to prove he wants something. I've spent my whole life being the dutiful one. But I am done letting duty decide what I'm allowed to feel for you, Ren Xiu. I should have said that a month ago. I'm saying it now, badly, on the floor of a hospital corridor, because I don't trust myself to find better words before something else tries to take you from me. I didn't answer right away. There was too much in my chest. Grief for Xiaodong's blood on my hands, fury at Bushing, the strange electric infusion of Yunhai's hand on my shoulder in the dark, and now this. Yance, unguarded for the first time since our wedding, offering me something that looked dangerously like honesty. I don't know what I feel, I admitted, because it was the only true thing I had left. About any of this. About you. About him. I've spent so long being handled, traded, protected by people who never once asked what I wanted that I don't know if I'd recognize what I want even if it was standing right in front of me. Then don't decide tonight, Yance said. Decide when you're ready. I only needed you to know that whatever you decide, I'm not going to spend the rest of this marriage hiding what I feel behind duty. Not anymore. Not after tonight. The door to the clinic opened before I could answer, and Su Man stepped out, exhausted but steady. She's stable, she said. She'll live. She's asking for you. Ren Xiu, both of you actually. She said there's something else she needs to tell you. Something about who gave the order. Yance and I exchanged a look, and I felt something settle between us that hadn't been there this morning. Not resolution, not yet, but the beginning of an alliance built on truth instead of duty. We walked into the clinic together, and Xiaotong, pale against the white pillows, met my eyes with an expression that told me the worst of the night wasn't over yet. "It wasn't your father who gave the final order," she said, her voice thin but clear. "I heard it wrong before. I was scared. I only caught half of it. It wasn't Yin Guoji who authorized the attack tonight." "Then who?" Her eyes flicked, just once, toward the door, toward the direction of the West Wing, where Boshing's rooms were. "It was your brother," she said. "He didn't want you protected, Ren Xiu. He wanted you afraid enough to never leave him." Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. I found Boshing in the study that had once belonged to our father, standing at the window with a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, and I understood the moment I saw his face that some part of him had been waiting for this conversation for a very long time. "Xiaodong is going to live," I said, closing the door behind me. "In case you were wondering whether your plan worked." He didn't turn around immediately. "I didn't want her hurt. You didn't care whether she was hurt. That's different." I crossed the room, my hands finally steady after a night of shaking, and set down on his desk the one thing I'd brought with me. The falsified evidence Yance had kept hidden for 3 years, copies he'd handed me an hour ago, without a word of hesitation. "You destroyed a man's life 10 years ago to weaken the Zhou house. You let me be traded into a marriage built on a lie you created. And tonight, when I finally started slipping out of your control, you tried to terrify me back into needing you. I never wanted to control you." His voice was rough, raw in a way I'd only heard once before, the night our mother died. "I wanted to keep you. Is that so different from what everyone else in this house wants? Yance wants to keep you safe in his house. Yinhai wants to keep you as a weapon against his family. Even Cheng Wei wants to keep you as leverage. Why does it become monstrous only when it's me?" "Because you're my brother," I said, and my voice broke on the word in a way I hadn't expected it to. "Because you were supposed to be the one person in this entire syndicate who loved me without wanting to own a piece of me. And instead you built a decade of lies and called it protection. And tonight you were willing to let a girl bleed out in a garden so that I'd be too afraid to stop needing you." He set the whiskey down with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "What do you want me to say, Xiu?" "I don't want you to say anything," I said. "I want you to understand that it's over. Whatever this was, whatever you told yourself it was, it ends tonight. I'm taking this evidence to old Madame Zhou myself, not to destroy you, because the truth is the only thing that might actually end this war instead of feeding it, and I am done letting the people who claim to love me decide that lies are kinder than honesty. They'll kill me," he said quietly, "if the truth comes out. The Zhou house will demand blood for what I did to Yinhai." "Maybe." I met his eyes and didn't look away. "You should have thought of that 10 years ago, before you decided my future was a currency worth spending." I walked out and left him standing in our father's study with his ruined whiskey and his ruined decade of lies. And I did not look back because some doors need to be closed all the way to stop the draft from getting in. Old Madame Zhou received the evidence in silence, reading every page twice, her face giving away nothing until she finally set it down on the table between us with the careful precision of a woman who had spent her whole life controlling exactly what she revealed. "You understand what this will cost your family," she said. "I understand what silence has already cost everyone else's," I said. "I'm done choosing the lie that's easiest to live with." She studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her ancient, unreadable eyes. "You are not what I expected when they told me the Yin family was sending a peace bride." "No," I agreed. "I don't think I am either." She summoned Yinhai and Yance both within the hour, and I stood in that room and watched a decade of manufactured grief finally crack open in front of the two brothers that had been built to divide. I watched Yunhai's fury turn, for the first time, away from his brother and toward the truth of what had actually been done to him. I watched Yance stand beside me instead of behind protocol, unflinching when old Madame Zhou asked him directly whether he had known and hidden it. "I did," he said. "For 3 years. I should have told you both the moment I found it." Yunhai's jaw worked, fists clenched, 10 years of directed hatred suddenly homeless in his chest. He looked at his brother, then at me, and something in his expression finally, quietly, broke apart into something closer to grief than rage. 10 years, he said, mostly to himself. 10 years, I hated the wrong house for the wrong reason. You didn't hate the wrong house, I said quietly. You hated the house that let it happen. That part was never wrong. He looked at me for a long moment, really looked past the hunger and the strategy in the decade of exile. And for the first time since he'd walked through those wedding doors, I saw something in his face that looked less like a claim and more like a question. What happens now, he asked. Not to his grandmother, not to his brother, to me. And for the first time in my entire life, I realized, standing in that room with the truth finally out in the open and every claim on me laid bare at last, that was a question I finally had the right to answer myself. Chapter 8. Resolution. I didn't answer Yinhai that night. I don't think anyone in that room expected me to. Not after everything that had been unearthed, not with the ash of a decade's lies still settling around us. Some choices deserve more than the adrenaline of the moment they're asked in. It took 3 weeks for the syndicate councils to finish picking through the wreckage of what Bushing had done. My father disowned him publicly to save what remained of the Yin family standing. A cruelty dressed up as consequence, the same currency our family had always traded in. Bushing left Hong Kong before the ink dried on the council's ruling, and the last time I saw him, he didn't ask for forgiveness. I think some part of him finally understood he hadn't earned the right to. Xiaodong recovered fully, though the scar on her shoulder never quite faded. She didn't go back to the Yin estate. Old Madame Zhou, in a gesture that surprised everyone, including me, offered her a position managing the Zhou family's legitimate trading house. Real work, real standing, the kind of life neither of us had ever been offered as bargaining chips. The last time we spoke, she'd laughed for the first time since the wedding, and I found I could finally hear it without the old ache of guilt underneath. Cheng Wei came to see me once more before he left the city, business concluded, employer paid off or abandoned. I never asked which. I meant what I said in the garden. He told me, unhurried as ever, hands in his pockets like he had nowhere else in the world to be. You were interesting on top of being leverage. For what it's worth, I hope whoever you choose deserves that. You could ask, I said, curious despite myself. I could. He smiled, faint and honest. But I watched you in that council room, Ren Xiu. I've made a career out of reading rooms. You'd already chosen before anyone asked the question out loud. I'm not in the business of losing to a decision that was made before I arrived. He inclined his head, something almost like respect in it. Find me if I'm wrong. He wasn't wrong. He walked out of my life with the same unbothered grace he'd walked into it, and I let him go without regret because he'd been right about the one thing that mattered. I'd already chosen. I found Yinhai in the garden where Xiaotong had bled, standing among the black pines like he was looking for something the smoke hadn't burned away yet. You came to give me an answer, he said, without turning. I came to give you the truth, which is better than an answer. I stood beside him, close enough to smell the winter and gun oil scent that had once made my body betray me before my mind had agreed to anything. You didn't want me, Yinhai. Not really. You wanted what I represented, a way back into a house that threw you away, a wound to press against your brother, the first thing in 10 years that felt like it might be yours to take. I understand that. I don't think it makes you a monster. But it isn't love. It's grief wearing love's clothes. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he'd argue. Instead, something in him seemed to loosen. 10 years of held breath finally let go. Maybe, he admitted, I don't know anymore what I actually wanted before I knew the truth about the exile. I think I wanted somewhere to put 10 years of rage, and you were standing in the doorway when I finally had a reason to come home. You don't need somewhere to put it anymore, I said gently. You have a truth now. Use it to rebuild something, not to claim someone. He looked at me for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, he laughed, quiet, rueful, the sound of man setting down a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. Yance is a fool if he doesn't already know how lucky he is. He knows, I said. It took him long enough to say it out loud, but he knows. Yinhai nodded once, and something between us settled into an understanding I hadn't expected to find. Not romance, but not enmity either. A brother, maybe in the end. The kind neither of us had actually had before. I found Yance on the veranda that evening. The same one where he'd once apologized for a marriage neither of us had chosen. And I understood, walking toward him, that I finally had. I thought you should be the first to know, I said, that I'm not leaving. Something in his face, carefully composed for a lifetime, cracked open by a single garden and a single confession, finally let go completely. Ren Xiu, I'm not choosing you because of duty, I said, before he could make it easier for both of us by retreating into it. I'm not choosing you because the councils expect it, or because it ends a war, or because it's safer than the alternative. I'm choosing you because you're the only one who ever asked what I wanted instead of deciding it for me, even when it cost you something to wait for the answer. He crossed the distance between us and took my hand, not the careful, permission-seeking touch of the last 3 months, but something sure, something finally unguarded. Then let me be honest with you one more time, he said. I love you. I have for longer than I let myself admit. I don't know how to be reckless the way my brother is, or dangerous the way Cheng Wei is. I only know how to be steady. I'm asking you to let that be enough. I looked at him, at the man who had married me to end a war and stayed to earn a choice instead. And for the first time since I'd walked down that wedding aisle in silk that weighed more than I did, I let myself want something without flinching from the wanting. It's enough, I said. It was always going to be enough, the day you stopped hiding behind it. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, Hong Kong went on being what it had always been, a city built on old debts and older blood. But for the first time in my life, standing there with Zhou Yance's hand in mine, I understood that I was no longer the currency this world traded in. I was, finally, the one doing the choosing.
I never expected to choose my own peace. I was always the one who decided how this ended. Make sure you're subscribed. This is just the beginning.